Hello everyone. Well, for today's video, I thought we would go through this stack of cards here, and each card represents a president of the United States, and we would go through and just talk a little bit about each one. So the front of the card here has the official presidential portrait of each president, and the back of the card has some facts about them. So this is obviously George Washington, our first president. He was president from 1789 to 1797. He's considered the father of his country. He died on December 14th, 1799. His wife was Martha Dandridge Custis Washington. He was the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. He was the president of the Constitutional Convention, and his portrait is on the $1 bill and the quarter. So this is the second president, which is John Adams. He was president from 1797 to 1801, and he is considered the father of the Navy. He died on July 4th, 1826, and his wife was Abigail Smith Adams, and he was minister to France, Britain, and the Netherlands. He was the first vice president, and he was the first president to live in the White House. He was also the father of the sixth president. This is Thomas Jefferson. He was the third president from 1801 to 1809, and he is considered the father of the Declaration of Independence. So lots of fathers here at the very beginning, obviously. He was born April 13th, 1747, and died on July 4th, 1826. His wife was Martha Wales Skelton Jefferson. He was the governor of Virginia. He authorized the Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark expedition. He founded the University of Virginia, and his portrait is on the $2 bill and the nickel. This is James Madison. He is the fourth president from 1809 to 1817, and he is the father of the Constitution. He died on June 28th, 1836, and his wife was Dolly Payne Todd Madison. He was the U.S. representative from Virginia. Both of his vice presidents died in office, and he was the shortest president at 5 foot 6 inches tall. And this says his portrait is on the $5,000 bill, but I don't think we have those anymore. I think that's old information. Here is the fifth president, James Monroe. He was president from 1817 to 1825. And his nickname is the last of the crooked hats. I'm not sure what that means. That's a very interesting nickname. Certainly not the father of anything. He died on July 4th, 1831, and his wife was Elizabeth Courtright Monroe. He was governor of Virginia. He signed the Missouri Compromise, forbidding slavery above the southern borders of Missouri. And he implemented the Monroe Doctrine, closing the Americans to further colonization. This is the sixth president, John Quincy Adams. He was president from 1825 to 1829, and his nickname was Old Man Eloquent. And he died on February 23rd, 1848. His wife was Louisa Catherine Johnson Adams. He was the son of the second president. And as Secretary of State, he wrote the Monroe Doctrine. And after presidency, he served in the Congress for 18 years. That's interesting. Here is the seventh president, Andrew Jackson. He was president from 1829 to 1837, and his nickname is Old Hickory. He died on June 8, 1845, and his wife's name was Rachel Donaldson Jackson. He was a war hero of the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812. He was the first U.S. representative from the state of Tennessee, and he founded the Democratic Party. And his portrait is on the $20 bill. This is the eighth president, Martin Van Buren, 1837 to 1841. His nickname was the Little Magician or Old Kinderhook. Again, I'm not sure why. He died on July 24th, 1862, and his wife's name was Hannah Hose Van Buren. He was governor of New York, the first president to have been born in the independent United States, the only president to have learned English as a second language because he grew up speaking Dutch. This is William Henry Harrison, the ninth president. He did not last very long. 1841, from March 4th to April 4th. His name was Old Tippecanoe, and I know that comes from his campaign slogan. He died on April 4th, 1841. His wife's name was Anna Tuthill Symes Harrison. He served the shortest term as president, just 1 month, and he is the first president to die in office from pneumonia. And I know that he got pneumonia because he stood out in the rain and spoke for a very long time during his inaugural address. And that is what gave him pneumonia, and he died shortly afterwards. This is our 10th president. He was obviously the vice president of William Henry Harrison and took over when he died from 1841 to 1845. He died on January 18th, 1862, and his wives, he had two wives, Leetta Christian Tyler, she died in 1842, and Julia Gardner Tyler. He was a governor of Virginia. He was the first president to be married while in office. He was the father of 15 children, more than any other president. So, I guess that's because he had two wives. He had a lot of children. This is the 11th president, James Knox Polk. He was president from 1845 to 1849. His nickname was Young Hickory. He died June 15th, 1849, and his wife's name was Sarah Childress Polk. He was the governor of Tennessee. He was the first dark horse candidate to win office. Dark horse meaning he was very little well known, and he came up out of nowhere and won. He extended the nation's borders to the Pacific Ocean after the Mexican War. This is our 12th president, Zachary Taylor. He was president from 1849 to 1850 for 16 months. His nickname was Old Rough and Ready. He died on July 9th, 1850. His wife's name was Margaret McCall Smith Taylor. He was the hero of the Mexican War, and he died in office after 16 months, after a 4th of July celebration. No one knows why. Here is our 13th president. He was the vice president of Zachary Taylor, and he was president from 1850 to 1853. And his name was Millard Fillmore. And his nickname was the Accidental President. Doesn't sound very flattering. He died March 8, 1874, and his wife, he had 2 wives. His wives' names were Abigail Powers Fillmore and Caroline Carmichael McIntosh Fillmore. He married his teacher, Abigail Powers, who started the Presidential Library in the Oval Office. He was the U.S. representative from New York. And the Compromise of 1850 delayed the war between the states for 10 years. The 14th president is Franklin Pierce. He was president from 1853 to 1857, and his nickname was Young Hickory of Granite Hills. So Hickory is a very popular nickname, and I imagine it comes from their campaigns that they ran, hickory being a very tough wood. He died on October 8, 1869, and his wife's name was Jane Means Appleton Pierce. He was a senator from New Hampshire. He rose to general during the Mexican War, and during his presidential oath of office, he chose to say, "I solemnly affirm," instead of, "I solemnly swear." This is the next president, the 15th one. His name was James Buchanan. His nickname was the Sage of Wheatland. He died on June 1st, 1868, and he did not have a wife. He was a senator from Pennsylvania. He was the only president to have never married. He ran as the Save the Union candidate. Near the end of his term, 7 states succeeded, forming the Confederate States of America. Which brings us to our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. From 1861 to 1865, he was known as Honest Abe or the Great Emancipator. He died on April 15th, 1865, and his wife's name was Mary Todd Lincoln. He was the first Republican president. 6 weeks after his first term, the attack on Fort Sumter began, starting the Civil War. His portrait is on the $5 bill and the penny, and he was the tallest president at 6 foot 4 inches. After him came Andrew Johnson, who was the vice president of Abraham Lincoln and came to be president after Abraham Lincoln was shot. He was president from 1865 to 1869, and he is known as the father of the Homestead Act. He died on July 31st, 1875, and his wife's name was Eliza McCardle Johnson. He was a senator from Tennessee, and slavery was abolished by the 13th Amendment under his presidency. And he was also the first president to be impeached by the House, but the Senate acquitted him. And he also purchased Alaska from Russia. Sounds like there's a fascinating story there. And I used to know it, but I don't remember. This is the 18th president, Ulysses Simpson Grant, from 1869 to 1877. His nicknames were the Unconditional Surrender Grant or the Hero of Appomattox. And Appomattox is where the Civil War ended with the surrender of the South. He died on July 23rd, 1885, and his wife's name was Julia Boggs Dent Grant. He changed his name from Hiram Ulysses Grant to avoid the HUG or HUG initials. He was the commander of the United States Army, held no other political office, and his portrait is on the $50 bill. This is the 19th president, Rutherford B. Hayes. He was president from 1877 to 1881. He is known as the Dark Horse President, or Rutherford, which I think is highly amusing. He died on January 17, 1893, and his wife's name was Lucy Ware Webb Hayes. He was the governor of Ohio. In a highly contested election, declared winner 3 days before the inauguration. The first time the Secret Service was assigned to presidential protection. He ended the Reconstruction in the South, and he signed bills allowing female attorneys to argue cases before the Supreme Court. This is the 20th president, James A. Garfield. He was president 1881 for 6.5 months. His nickname is the Preacher President. And he died September 19, 1881. His spouse was Lucretia Rudolph Garfield. He worked on the Erie Canal as a boy. He was the first left-handed president and the second president to be assassinated. His vice president was Chester A. Arthur. He was the 21st president from 1881 to 1885. His nickname was the Gentleman Boss. He died November 18, 1886, and his wife's name was Ellen Lewis Hendren Arthur. She died in 1880. He became president upon Garfield's death, took the oath of office in New York City, hired a famous interior designer, Louis Comfort Tiffany, to redecorate the White House. And he kept his fatal kidney disease a secret during his last term as president. Did not know that. The 22nd president is Grover Cleveland. He was president from 1885 to 1889 and is known as the Veto President, and we will see him again. He died on June 24th, 1908. His wife was Frances Folsom Cleveland. He was governor of New York, and he was the first president to be wed in the White House. He vetoed more bills than any other president at that time. After him comes Benjamin Harrison, the 23rd president from 1889 to 1893. He was known as Young Tippecanoe. He died on March 13, 1901, and he had 2 wives, Caroline Lavinia Scott Harrison and Mary Scott Lord Dimmick Harrison. He was the great-grandson of Benjamin Harrison, signer of the Declaration of Independence. He rose to general during the Civil War. He was a senator from Indiana, and he was inaugurated 100 years after the first president. Grover Cleveland, once again. He was also the 24th president, from 1893 to 1897, and this nickname is awesome. His nickname was his obstinacy. This is the 25th president, William McKinley, Jr. His nickname was the Idol of Ohio, and he was president from 1897 to 1901. He died on September 14, 1901, and his wife's name was Ida Saxton McKinley. He was the governor of Ohio, and he was assassinated 6 months into his second term. His namesake is Mount McKinley, the highest peak in North America, and his portrait is on the $500 bill. After him is the 26th president, Theodore Roosevelt. From 1901 to 1909, his nickname was Teddy or the Rough Rider. He died January 6th, 1919, and he had 2 wives, Alice Hathaway Lee Roosevelt and Edith Kermit Carow Roosevelt. He was the governor of New York. He was the youngest president, 42 years, 10 months, upon taking office after the death of McKinley. He doubled the number of national parks in our country. And in 1906, he won the Nobel Peace Prize for ending the Russo-Japanese War. The 27th president is William Howard Taft. From 1909 to 1913, his nickname was Big Bill. He died on March 8, 1930, and his wife's name was Helen Herron Taft. He was the first civil governor of the Philippines. He served as Secretary of War under Theodore Roosevelt. He established the first income tax, and after leaving office, he served as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was also the largest president, 6 feet and 300 pounds. Hence the nickname Big Bill. After him was Woodrow Wilson, the 28th president from 1913 to 1921. His nickname was the Professor. He died on February 3rd, 1924, and he also had 2 wives, Ellen Louise Axton Wilson and Edith Boiling Galt Wilson. He was the governor of New Jersey. He was the only president to earn a PhD, and he was president during World War I. The 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote under his presidency. After him was the 29th president, Boren G Harding. He was president from 1921 to 1923. His nickname was President Hardly. He died on August the 2nd, 1923, and his wife's name was Florence Mabel Kling Harding. He was senator from Ohio, and he won the first presidential election in which women could vote. He was also the first president to speak on the radio. He died in California, traveling back from the first ever presidential visit to Alaska. I didn't know that. So since he died in office, his vice president, Calvin Coolidge, the 30th president, took over. From 1923 to 1929, his nickname was Silent Cal. He died on January 5th, 1933, and his wife's name was Grace Ann Goodhue Coolidge. He was born on the 96th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. He was the governor of Massachusetts, and he assumed office upon the death of Harding. He was sworn in as president by the Justice of Peace in Vermont, which was his own father. After him was Herbert Clark Hoover, the 31st president from 1929 to 1933. His nickname was the Grand Old Man. He died on October 20th, 1964, and his wife's name was Lou Henry Hoover. He was a self-made multimillionaire by the age of 40. He was Secretary of Commerce, and the stock market crash of 1929 during his presidency brought about the Great Depression. After him, of course, was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd president, and he was president from 1933 to 1945. His nickname was FDR. He died on April 12th, 1945, and his wife's name was Anne Eleanor Roosevelt. He was the fifth cousin of Theodore Roosevelt, and he was paralyzed by polio at age 39. He was the governor of New York, and he was president during the Great Depression and World War II. He created the Social Security system and is the longest-serving president, 12 years, 1 month. His portrait is on the dime. After him was Harry S. Truman, the 33rd president. From 1945 to 1953, the man from Independence was his nickname. He died December 26, 1972. His wife's name was Elizabeth Virginia Wallace Truman. He had no middle name, so he added the S to his name. He was a senator from Missouri. He assumed the presidency upon the death of Roosevelt, and he's the one who ordered the use of the atomic bomb to end World War II, and he's the one who ordered troops into the Korean War. After him was Dwight D Eisenhower, the 34th president from 1953 to 1961. His nickname was Ike. He died on March 28, 1969, and his wife's name was Marie Geneva Dowd Eisenhower. He was Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces during World War II, commander of NATO forces in Europe, and he was the first president of all 50 states, and he was the first president to campaign on TV. After him came John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th president from 1961 to 1963, and his nickname was JFK. He died on November 22nd, 1963, and his wife's name was Jacqueline Lee Bouvier Kennedy. He was the first president born in the 20th century, the senator from Massachusetts. He was the first Catholic and the youngest elected president. He established the Peace Corps, and he was assassinated in Dallas as he rode in a motorcade. His portrait is on the 50-cent coin. His vice president was Lyndon B. Johnson, the 36th president from 1963 to 1969. His nickname was LBJ. He died on January 22nd, 1973. A lot of presidents dying in the 70s. His spouse was Claudia Alta Taylor Johnson. Her nickname was Lady Bird. He was a U.S. Senator from Texas. He was sworn in as president while aboard Air Force One, and he signed the Civil Rights Act into law. After him was Richard M. Nixon, the 37th president from 1969 to 1974. His nickname was Tricky Dick, and that was not a compliment. He died on April 22nd, 1994, and his wife's name was Thelma Catherine Ryan Nixon. He is the president during the first man landing on the moon. He pulled the troops out of Vietnam, and he improved relations with China and Russia. And he was the first president to resign rather than face impeachment. After him came Gerald R. Ford. He was the vice president under Nixon. From 1974 to 1977, his nickname was Mr. Nice Guy. He died December 26, 2006, and his wife's name was Elizabeth Betty Ann Bloomer Ford. He was a U.S. representative from Michigan. He assumed the presidency after Nixon's resignation. He was the only president never to be elected as president or vice president, and he was the longest-lived president at 93 years, 165 days. After him was Jimmy Carter, the 39th president from 1977 to 1981. He was known as Jimmy. He is still living, and his wife's name was Eleanor Rosalind Smith Carter. He ran a family business as a peanut farmer. He was governor of Georgia, and he negotiated the Camp David peace accord between Egypt and Israel. And he won the 2002 Nobel Peace Prize. After him was Ronald Wilson Reagan, the 40th president, from 1981 to 1989. His nickname was the Great Communicator. He died June 5th, 2004, and he had two wives, Jane Wyman and Nancy Davis Reagan. He was the oldest president, 69 years and 11 months, when he took office. He was governor of California, and he was an actor in 53 films and president of the Screen Actors Guild. And he appointed the first woman, Sandra Day O'Connor, to the Supreme Court. After him came George Herbert Walker Bush, the 41st president, from 1989 to 1993, and his nickname was simply 41. He is still living, and his wife's name is Barbara Pierce Bush. He was a father of the 43rd president, U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, director of the CIA, and he was president during the collapse of the Soviet Union. After him came William Jefferson Clinton, the 42nd president from 1993 to 2001. His nickname was the Comeback Kid. He is still alive, and his wife's name is Hillary Diane Rodham Clinton. He won a Rhodes Scholarship from Oxford University. He was governor of Arkansas at age 32. He was impeached by Congress but acquitted by the Senate. And his spouse served as Secretary of State under President Obama. The 43rd president was George W. Bush, 2001 to 2009, and his nickname was W. He is still living, and his wife's name is Laura Welsh Bush. He was a son of the 41st president. He was governor of Texas, and he won the 2000 presidential race with the closest election results in history, and he was president during 9/11. And finally, the 44th president, Barack Hussein Obama II, from 2009 to now, and his wife's name is Michelle LaVaughn Robinson Obama. He was the first African-American president. He was a senator from Illinois, and he signed the Affordable Care Act into law. So that is all of the 44 presidents we have had in this country, starting with George Washington. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Please subscribe to my channel. I have many more videos to make for you guys. I'll see you later. Bye.